For about a century and a half, beginning in 1800, Burnley was famous as a centre of the cotton industry. But the town's association with textiles predates that by several centuries. In those days, the staple industry of England was wool, and so it was with Burnley. The town had a very early fulling mill, but it wasn't until the 16th and 17th centuries that the production of woolen cloth became central to the local economy. The skills that were developed in the woolen industry, spinning and weaving, for example, were both readily adaptable to the needs of the cotton industry. At first, those employed in textiles worked at home. At Hagate Hill End, there's one of the best of the early buildings in which textile production was carried out. Hand weaving was an intricate craft, and considerable light was required. This explains the large windows. Later, water-powered mills were constructed. Extwistle Mill had been built as a corn mill, probably in the 16th century. Then it was used for spinning wool, and after that, for spinning and weaving cotton. By the time cotton was manufactured here, a steam engine was installed, as can be seen from the tall chimney. The Trafalgar area, earlier this century. Today we would call it the Weaver's Triangle, and in this area of town there are several very interesting old industrial buildings. Victoria Mill, built in 1855 by Edward Stocks Massey, one of the Massey Brewing family and one of the town's greatest benefactors. Victoria Mill was a throstle mill, so called because it housed spinning machines of that name. When working, they sounded a bit like the song of thrushes, which in Lancashire were known as throstles. Trafalgar Mill dates from 1861, and it was a mule mill designed to house spinning mules, two of which faced each other on each floor. Unfortunately, the most important spinning mill in this part of town, Clock Tower Mill, which was started by George Slater in the 1840s, was badly damaged by fire a few years ago. At Lower House, when first built, this was the largest spinning mill in the world. There were other great spinning mills. Rishton was close to the town centre. Barden Mill, as you can see, was built on the banks of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. Mind you, this didn't prevent it from being destroyed by fire in 1905. By this time, Burnley had ceased to be a great spinning town, but it had become the most important centre of cotton weaving in the world. A study of the older mills reveals that spinning and weaving existed happily together. At Trafalgar Mill, the weaving shed with its north light roofs, but overshadowed by the spinning mill, still exists. This is still the best place in Burnley to study a north light roof. Such a feature was necessary in weaving, again because of the light requirements of the weavers. They needed light, but they didn't want direct sunlight, as that would make it difficult to weave. There was a time when cotton was king, and when, as the saying goes, England's bread hung on Lancashire's thread. Scenes like these remind us of those days.
Well, I started in the textile trade in 1950 with Christmas, 15 years old, and I started at Sharp Thornber's Park Shed Mill in Leyland Road in Burnley. We started it was the preparation department, it's still called that today, and it was nearly always upstairs then, although it's all on one level these days. And they used to reaching in for hand looming. The gentleman used to hand loom, which is like a craft trade, as you might know then, and it was all coloured shirting and things like that. And it used to be about 15 to 16 shillings a week for 45 hours. It used to start around, well, it did start at 7 in the morning, had a half-hour breakfast at 8:15 to 8:45, then you had an hour for dinner and finish at 5:30. And then on top of that, they used to send us to night school for 3 nights a week. So when I left school, I thought, oh, this is a bit harder than school, this. I wanted to leave, but then I didn't then.
We still have quite a number of weaving sheds in Burnley, though few are used for the purpose for which they were built. The best place to see them is Harl Syke. If Burnley was the most important cotton weaving town, Harl Syke was certainly the greatest weaving village. Here you see Hull Syke Mill, the oldest in the village. It was built in 1856, and its eventual success led to the creation of the village itself. However, the mill is no longer filled with looms as it was at the turn of the century. The engine, though, survives. Not here, but in London at the Science Museum, where this Burnley-made machine is seen by tens of thousands of visitors every year. Hull Syke itself contains something rather special, for in the village you can still witness what it was like to work in a Victorian weaving shed.
Almost everyone in Hull Syke was in the cotton industry, almost everyone. Weavers, tacklers, overlookers, whatever they want to call them. They were nearly all in. And everybody understood that nearly everybody else worked in the cotton industry in some way. So it was one big happy family in a way, and there are also many, many people related to each other in Hull Syke because they had large families and because they intermarried, and so we ourselves had an extended family. Nearly everybody as well in those days wore clogs with irons on, and just for example, I can remember lying in bed. They used to start work very early in the morning in those days, and I can remember lying in bed in winter when it was pitch black, and it was like an army, the retreat from Moscow.
Clogs, well, they did make a noise. In fact, if you'd have been in bed, it would have wakened you up. There was that much of a clatter because they'd all irons on the bottom of the clogs, and I mean, they were working on the pavements, so it made a terrible noise when they were going to the mill.
Hull Syke itself contains something rather special, for in the village you can still witness what it was like to work in a Victorian weaving shed. Queen Street Mill is the only steam-powered cotton mill left, and it's a National Heritage Site. The engine, Peace, was given that name at the armistice in 1918. Once there were scores of engines like this in Burnley, now there are only 2 in working order. Listen to Peace as it quietly and efficiently provides the power to the hundreds of looms that remain in the mill. An old beaming engine. The machine was used to assemble the warp beam that was put into a loom where the weaving took place. Before that could happen, each end of yarn had to be threaded through the heels and reeds. The process was called looming, and in the early part of this century, it was a painstaking process. In the weaving shed itself, the visitor can really see what it was like to work in a Burnley cotton mill. The power looms are almost all original and are made by the great Burnley firms Harling and Todd and Pemberton Brothers. The first thing that strikes you is the tremendous noise. And remember, here only a few looms are working. Just think what it was like when there were over 1,000 looms roaring away in this shed.
Mills were very noisy. In fact, in Queen Street Manufacturing Company, I believe they had 1,000 looms. And if you can imagine the clatter that those looms made, the people couldn't talk to each other. They had to find a way of communicating. And so they developed what they called shed talk. And shed talk consisted of using your lips, speaking very slowly, and your fingers to say, I can go into pictures to knead, and from that sort of thing came what we called memoing. Memoing meant gesticulating with your fingers, like the sky is up, the ground is down, or oh, I don't like that, mang. And that's where I don't know where the words came from, but that was what memoing was. It was pulling your face, your lips, your fingers to express some specific thing.
Today, little is left of cotton weaving in our town, but there's one firm which still carries on what was the staple trade. Their mill is close to the centre, and the name of the firm is one of the greatest in cotton in Burnley. Spencer's were once the largest firm of weavers in town, with thousands of looms. Their modern mill is a considerable contrast with the museum at Queen Street.
When we came down here 25 years and it was all little usters, ustomatics, spinning machines, frames, which didn't change a great deal from our point of view till about 8 to 9 years since then they started the looms. Now all the weavers who's worked in weaving mills, they regard weaving with shuttles. Now there's no such thing as a shuttle anymore. It's all, here we have rapiers, other places have water jets and air jets. And from our point of view, we have now gone on from knotting machine, where they used to hand loom them. I used to hand loom down here myself quite a while as well and look after the machine. It's gone on from hand looming to an automated computerised looming machine made in Italy, a Verga.
Textile machinery was made here, and Burnley was once the centre of the part of the industry that made machines for cotton weaving. We've already seen the Harling and Todd and Pemberton looms at Queen Street, but today there's little left of the textile engineering industry. The firm that built these premises was Butterworth and Dickinson, Butts and Dicks as they were known by just about everyone in Burnley. They were founded by Jeremiah Wilkinson in 1779 as wool spinners. At that time he could neither maintain the machines he already had nor buy reliable ones, so he started to make his own. Eventually, the engineering side of his business superseded textile spinning. The firm's first factory was at Saunder Bank. And then the first Globe Works, which was on Trafalgar Street, was added. It had its own railway sidings. Another great Burnley industry was coal mining. The town is at the centre of the northern section of the Lancashire coalfield. Coal has been mined here for centuries, but it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution, and the latter part of that mining became a large employer. The early mines were very small affairs compared to the large ones that many Burnley people remember. This photograph is of a mine which was once operated near the present Burnley Central Railway Station. Compare this to these views of a very large mine, Bank Hall, the biggest in Burnley. Bank Hall Pit was owned by the company we often called the Exors. The proper name was the Exors of Colonel John Hargreaves. The Hargreaves family lived at Bank Hall and Ormerod House. When the mail line failed in the 1830s, the two joint heiresses and their husbands, General Scarlett, the hero of Balaclava in the Crimean War, the Reverend William Thursby, and the latter's descendants continued to own the company almost to nationalisation in the 1940s. Today there's little left of Burnley's coal industry, but many memories can be rekindled by studying the collections of the Burnley Central Library. Hapton Valley Pit. Those who worked there called it Happy Valley, but sadly this mine was the scene of Burnley's worst mining disaster. An explosion on the 22nd of March 1962 killed 16 miners outright, 3 more died of their injuries, and another 22 were injured, 13 of them seriously. H.S. Stevenson, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Mines and Quarries, wrote in his report on the accident, "I find that the casualties resulted from an explosion which occurred at about 9:45 a.m. in the No. 2 district of the Union Seam. Although coal dust played some part, the explosion was predominantly one of fire damp and affected about 680 yards of roadway and face." No one in Burnley is likely to forget that day. Every year there is a memorial service which is attended not only by the families and friends of those who so tragically lost their lives, but civic dignitaries and representatives of the churches and other organisations in the town. Cotton, textile engineering and coal mining were Burnley's biggest industries for most of the 20th century. But there were other traditional industries, such as brewing. The Bridge End Brewery was founded in the 18th century. It was operated by the Holgates, one of Burnley's pioneering industrial families, until the great financial crash of 1824. It was then purchased by Mr. Lord Massey, and Massey's became the town's largest and best-known brewery until it was taken over and closed by Bass Charrington in 1974. Grimshaws, who according to their adverts made sparkling ales, were at the Well Hall Brewery. The building was also known as the Kirby Brewery after its founder John Kirby, who came here from Liverpool in 1823. Today, the hotel on the site is called the Comfort Inn, but everybody in Burnley still calls it the Kirby, which, when it was built in the early 1960s, was one of only 2 or 3 four-star hotels in Lancashire. Burnley was never a great brewing town, but at one time it did have 5 breweries. There's only one left, and Morehouses, though it had connections with brewing going back to the last century, wasn't a maker of its own beers until recently. Brickmaking was another local industry. The brick kilns of the Burnley Brick and Lime Company were once a prominent site just off Barden Lane. And at Blannell Street, which is now a small industrial estate, there was once Duckett's Sanitary Ware Works, whose products could be found all over the country. The branch store was in Curzon Street. At Townley Hall, these sanitary ware products are preserved for all to see. The one on the right is made by Duckett's, but the one on the left is part of the mechanism of a Burnley tippler, or long drop toilet. In the days before flush toilets, most Burnley houses would have had one of these. At the Craft Museum at Townley there are many other reminders of old Burnley industries and trades. The town was once a considerable centre of washing machine manufacture, as these old machines testify. Many people will remember Burko Dean and their famous Baby Burko. There's a reconstruction of a Burnley bar, complete with Massey memorabilia. Another reconstruction is of a traditional clogger's shop, and there's also a collection of things from various mills about the town. Burnley was fortunate before the Second World War to be able to begin the process of replacing its traditional industries with more modern ones. The process began at the Cannons on Colne Road. Everyone called this spot the Cannons after the Russian guns presented to the town in honour of General Scarlett. But in 1936, on the other side of the road, platers and stampers arrived. They made stainless steel kitchenware and cutlery, and soon the town acquired the nickname Little Sheffield. When the factory was built, the council got a good ticking off, because it was against government policy to invest public funds in private industry. Burnley industry was given another boost by the war. Many of the town's textile mills and factories were taken over for military purposes. Even Queen Street Mill in Hull Syke was not unaffected. Cotton was still required, and some mills were kept open. Often, though, firms had to move to premises reserved for cotton production.